Warning, the podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast, the murder of Joseph Trevor Dilger, Part 2 of 4. So if that ignitable liquid is not where you gathered or where wasn't burned in this case, such as if it wasn't poured there, do you just not find anything?
Well, just because a sample does come back negative doesn't mean it wasn't there. We could take the sample in the wrong spot. It could have been completely consumed during the fire. This particular seat, the material of it, it was a foam. I was fairly certain we had a good sample, and our lab results would confirm that.
What was it confirmed to be?
It was confirmed to be gasoline.
Gasoline.
And real quick, just do you ever use dogs? Are there dogs that can help with this type of work?
We do have a Lexington Fire Department used to have a canine. It was an ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms canine. Lexington doesn't have that anymore. There is an ATF dog that can be used across the state. It's in Bowling Green, Kentucky. There's a handler there.
That's a pretty good trip to Lexington, then. That takes some time to get them there.
So we go to the bay, and the coroner has assisted in removing the body. What do you do at this point to even begin to identify who your victim is, and have you gone yet to talk to the vehicle owner?
We started that process that or early morning hours. It was Monday morning by now. It was actually Labor Day. Myself and Detective Ham, the address that we had was an address. It was kind of on the Woodford County, Jessamine County line, if that's correct.
That does, yeah, there's that.
And we had a hard time finding it that night. We couldn't find it that night. Google failed me terribly bad. So our directions app. But so we came back, we regrouped. By that time, it was 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. We decided to take a couple hours, wait till daylight, and work on some stuff that we could work on at the time until it became daylight and we could go back out and maybe locate this address.
So the car hadn't been reported stolen, or had it?
No, the car hadn't been reported stolen. That Monday we were able to locate the address of the last registered owner, which she didn't live there anymore. It was a farm. It was a small farm, horse farm. We talked to the owner, and he had given us, he knew the person we were talking about because she used to live on that farm. And he said that he would have to get in touch with some friends to have her get in touch with me. So not long after I left that farm, she did, in fact, call me and inform me that she had sold the car to Mr. Dilger, and that he just hadn't transferred the car over into his name.
So it was, in fact, his own car. The victim was in his car.
That's correct.
So at this point, did you have his name? Did you know who he was? Or were you thinking, I have victim X and I know a Mr. Dilger owns the car? Or did your suspicions let you think it was the same person?
Well, from that point, I mean, we thought maybe it was him, but obviously we couldn't say for sure because we didn't have an identification on the body. So I immediately got his parents' address, or got the last known address for him here in Lexington, and I went to that location and spoke with his parents. And then from that point in time, we were pretty confident that it was, in fact, going to be Trevor.
As far as the other identification and everything, where is the autopsy timing into all of this while you're doing these things? And did you and Brandon go to the autopsy, or who did?
I did not go to the autopsy. Our forensic service unit would have went and taken photos, and as well as the medical examiner. Chris may have went to the autopsy too.
Yeah, anytime we have a fire death, fire arson investigator goes to the autopsy, and I actually did go to the autopsy on this. And the reason is when we talk about an arson charge, if an individual is inside, arson uses the word building, but a building also encompasses a vehicle. When you look at the definition, arson. So this would be a building. And if the victim was alive at the time of the fire, and died from the fire, the charge would be an arson first charge, which is a Class A felony. So we attended the autopsy to determine if Dilger was alive at the time of the fire or not. And through that autopsy, we did determine that he was deceased prior to the fire being set. Another reason I wanted to go there is I wanted to take additional fire debris samples. There were some clothing, articles of clothing that were still on him. I think his socks, a piece of his sock was still on his leg. The band from his shorts was still on him partially, and the area around his shirt collar, there was a little bit of clothing. And I took 3 different samples, and the reason I did is because arson, you have to take in consideration the intent to destroy a building. And sometimes showing that intent can be a challenge, or proving that intent. And the reasoning behind taking 3 different samples, and if all 3 of them were positive for an ignitable liquid, then to me, and possibly to the jury, it would show that their intent was to really get rid of this victim's body to the best of their ability, and they doused the body completely. So that was the reason I took the samples, and all these were sent to the lab. And at this point, we didn't have anything confirmed yet as far as any positive or negative for ignitable liquids at this particular point.
Let me ask this. You talked about the determination that he was deceased when the fire was lit. Are you comfortable with talking about what are some of the things that they look for? And I say they, the medical examiner, just in layman's terms, what are some of the basic things they look at maybe to determine, because that's a big deal, whether somebody suffered or if that was the cause of death. What do we look at?
One of the big things they look for is soot in the lungs. If there's not a presence of that, it means they were deceased at the time, because they're not actually breathing during the actual fire. So if they don't have any soot down in their bronchial tubes and things like that, then typically that means they were already deceased at the time of the fire.
So what was determined to be his cause of death?
His cause of death was gunshot wounds.
Could you identify where on his body he was shot?
One of the interesting things, and obviously I was there to witness this, so the first thing they did was they take the body and they conduct an x-ray. And they x-rayed the body, and at that point, they could see something on the x-ray of some kind of projectile. Actually, they could see 2. One of them was in the head, and one of them was up around the shoulder clavicle area, if I remember correctly. And so during that autopsy, just like Tim was saying, we did it. She did identify, the medical examiner did identify that the individual was deceased. He didn't have any smoke in his trachea or in his lungs, but we had two projectiles of some sort in his body. So she did find the one in his head initially, and she was looking around for the second one. And it was interesting because I could tell she was perplexed. And so she took the body back in and did a second x-ray, and it was still there. And so she paid a little more attention, I guess, or kind of zoned in on a particular area around his clavicle and brought him back in. And the actual projectile had went in the bone, like the bone marrow of his bone up around his clavicle area.
Fascinating, because sometimes I've seen that too, where you do the x-ray and then depending upon what kind of condition the body is that can be very difficult on a medical examiner. I had one time where the victim I had been shot with a variety of ammunition out of the same revolver. One of those was a scatter shot, which is, you all know if you dove hunt, it's like small BBs or something inside. And I remember the ME doing the same thing. She could see it. There were several pellets. And then she would start to search the body cavity, the thoracic region, and then she couldn't find them and wheeled back in there. And it's not as easy as TV makes it out to be, for sure.
So, Chris, were you or Tim, well, I guess, Tim, I should ask you, when you reached out to the family to identify this car, did they suspect anything? Had they not heard from him for a couple of days? Or did you have to be the bearer of bad news to say, we suspect your son's a victim?
I was the bearer of bad news in this particular incident, but I'd also informed them that we didn't know if it was in fact him for sure, but they were pretty confident. And, the reason they was because he was living from couch to couch. He had developed a narcotic problem, and the parents had last seen him, a few days prior to that. So, once we towed him the car and that there was a body in the back, they were pretty confident it was him. So from that point, we were obviously looking at Trevor and looking at or Joseph. I call him Trevor because that's what everybody called him, was Trevor. But we started looking into his life immediately because we were pretty confident it was him. And one of the things that I had to do was, talk to the parents to see where was his dentist? When was the last time he'd been to the dentist? Because that was probably going to be the only way that we could identify him, was through his dental records.
Is that how you ultimately did identify him?
Yes, we let the medical examiner know who his last dentist was, and she was able to get the dental records from them, and then that's ultimately how we did identify him.
How much time are you talking that it takes once you inform the medical examiner until that positive identification?
It took several days because, if you remember, this is a holiday weekend.
Monday.
This is Monday. So, we can't get any records on Monday. So it was that week, ultimately, when they were able to identify him.
And then you had to go back to the parents and confirm that?
Yes.
And I can't just imagine.
Well, mainly the coroner typically does that, but this family already knew. I mean, they knew it. They felt it, and they knew it. But the coroners would make contact with them to decide on what they wanted to do with the remains.
Let me ask this, because when you talked about the struggles he was having with substance abuse, which makes this even more tragic, because we find people in those positions and in conditions in their life, and I think the sad thing I always saw was that, man, they didn't have a shot at moving away. Do you see that they couldn't? If they had a shot at improving and getting better, that was taken away from them. As an investigator, does that heighten your senses or your awareness, or do you look at those risk factors that they tend to start to guide you on where you're going to go with this?
Well, obviously we started looking at the area that he was hanging out. He was hanging out in the Cardinal Valley area with some friends. So, we knew that that's probably an area that we needed to look into, and some of the people that lived and hung around with him. It heightened it. I mean, that was his area, apparently, according to his parents. That's where he laid his head at whenever he could find a place to lay his head at, and because he couldn't come home.
So the family tells you that he's been hanging out, Tim, in this Cardinal Valley area. So what do you do at that point? Do you canvass this area? Because that's a pretty big subdivision.
No, there's just no way that you can canvass this area. But, you put that in the back of your mind as to where he might be out there, where he might be hanging out there. But there really wasn't a lot we could do with that at that point in time until we found someone he was hanging out with, or a friend, or someone that might be able to lead us in the direction of someone that he was last with.
So as an investigator, meanwhile, Chris, I guess you have your part going on. Tim, where do you even begin to know who his friends are? You've just learned who he is. How, as an investigator, do you go about digging to find out any of these links with friends or clues?
Well, typically what you would do is talk to the parents and look at the cell phone that they might have if they had one, Facebook, if they had a Facebook page. But unfortunately, Mr. Dilger, he had none of this. He didn't have a cell phone. His Facebook page, we didn't see anything on there that would lead us to who he may have been hanging out with last. The parents did give us a name of a friend who would have maybe been able to give us some information as to what he had been doing or where he had been at last. So that's where we kind of started was with the family, and to see who he may have been with. And ultimately we talked to a friend who said that he had last seen him in the Cardinal Valley area, but didn't know who he was with or where he'd been. And that was that. That was the only information we had as to what he'd been doing.
So you kind of hit a dead end.
We did at that point in time. But, as the days went on, or a day or so later, we started getting some information that helped us tremendously. So
what information was that? And Chris, what are you doing during this time?
So I know after the autopsy, which was the 5th, which would have been Monday, I think on the 6th, we were fire investigators. We were working with Homicide to try to capture some surveillance cameras to see if we could see a vehicle. I think there was a report of a van of some sort was the van that was leaving that area when the car was discovered on fire. So we were trying to pull up some surveillance cameras from some local businesses that go out on Frankfort Pike, Ironworks. No, not Ironworks. Leestown Road. And that was on the 6th. And that was all, for us, I think it was all dead ends. I don't know if anything came from any of the videos.
No, we had gotten video from several locations in and around the area, and to include the London Dairy, the burn victim there, because, we thought maybe that had something to do with it too. But ultimately, none of the video surveillance panned out for us.
Where do you find all this video? How do you go about, what's the methodology on that, and what are you looking for?
Well, one thing that we did was start looking at routes as to, how they would have gotten out onto Red Road, which route would they have taken. And there was multiple ways you could get out to Red Road. So we everybody got together and we started naming off places. You take this route, this location, and see what we can find and see if anything proves to be fruitful. Unfortunately, in this case, none of it was.
So where do we go now?
On the 7th, FSU had contacted us. They wanted Arson to assist with a fire debris sift. And basically what that is when you go through all this fire debris that's inside this car and you methodically pull it out, you sift it, and you look for anything of evidentiary value, even to the smallest piece of evidence that could possibly be in there. So to do that, and again, this vehicle, keep in mind, it's at a secure spot. It's in a building. It's got great lighting, which gave us the ability to do a very thorough, controlled environment, atmosphere. So we call the ladder company to come out to assist us with the removal of the top and the doors. And that way we don't have anything obstructing our ability to go in there and dig and do our sift. So what we did was we took the vehicle, and this is common on any fire scene if we have to get that meticulous with debris sifting, but we divided it into quadrants. We divided the vehicle into 4 quadrants. So the front seat, driver's seat was A, the passenger seat was B, back seat behind the passenger was C, and then the back seat behind the driver was D. And so 2 investigators, myself and Laura Harrison, we worked on the driver's side of the vehicle, and then Lieutenant Johnson and Lieutenant Blanton worked on the passenger side of the vehicle. And so now we've got this vehicle wide open. We don't have anything obstructing us. We even were able to remove the seats because we wanted to basically get all the way down to the pan of the vehicle and get every single piece of debris. And keep in mind, by this time, we know our victim has been shot twice. So we're looking for anything. We're looking for a gun. We're looking for shell casings. And again, as an arson investigator, we're looking for any ignitable, anything that could be used to ignite the fire. Because again, we still want to find any evidence that's going to help support our arson charge. So we begin this process, and Laura and I are working in the front, and I'm almost finished with the front, and I look up, and there's a shell casing right underneath the emergency brake. After I removed some debris, it kind of shook the debris off of it and exposed this shell casing. So we document all that. Lexington FSU photographs it. We pull it out. And so we finished the front seat. We didn't find anything else of evidentiary value. I think Lieutenant Johnson and Lieutenant Blanton ended up finding some dog tags, found a wallet, and I think they found a couple other things not really of evidentiary value. And then when I got to the back seat, my second to last handful of debris, and it was on the seat. I put the second to last piece of the handful of debris in the screen, and Laura goes through there, finds the second shell casing. And so at that point, we're able to identify the shell casings as being a .380 caliber. So that information in itself was good. Now we know what type of firearm was used to kill our victim. And then Lexington Police, and Tim, you can explain this more as far as the ballistics, I'm sure, what they did with the shell casings.
Let me jump in real quick because you said you found a wallet. I think we've got pictures. I want people to see what it looks like to look in that car while you had to do a sift. A lot of people will hear you say that and say, well, duh, you could have seen a wallet out there with a flashlight. I don't think people appreciate what these things look like when they've been burned that bad. So that's a lot of work. These things just don't pop out, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Well, no, you got to remember all the interior of the car and the seat, everything just comes down and, and just in a pile and covers all this stuff up.
Are there things that can happen, Chris, during a vehicle fire like that to different parts that tell you different stories? Like when glass breaks or when it melts or anything?
Yeah, the interesting thing about a vehicle fire is one of the telltale signs if a fire starts in the engine compartment or the passenger compartment is the way the windshield fails. If the fire is in the engine compartment, per se, the windshield will fail at the bottom. And so then the top of the windshield, it will be a hinge. And then typically that windshield will fall straight down. If the fire starts in the passenger compartment, then that windshield will fail up high because the fire and the heat is attacking the glue at the top of the windshield as opposed to the bottom portion. And when it collapses, it will collapse and it will cover more of an area. It doesn't just fall straight down. It kind of falls at an angle as your windshield is in your vehicle at an angle. So that's one fire pattern that's used to try to identify, again, the area of origin or the origin that the fire starts in. And in this case, that was one of the fire patterns that we used to help to further identify the area of origin to be in the passenger compartment, and the fire progressed into the engine compartment as opposed to the other way around.
See, that's something I never would know. I couldn't even start.
Something I wanted to add here was interesting point was while they're doing all this, and of course we don't have a lot of information on who Trevor would have been with. So I was already in the process of looking at cell towers and doing a triangulation of the cell towers in that area and finding out which ones were there, the way I could do a cell phone tower dump. And I've been in contact with all the cell phone companies, seeing how many days that they would keep these cell towers or these phones coming into these cell towers. And, it come to find out they kept them for a lot longer than what I thought. So, we're a couple of days into this and we don't know who he may have been with. And we know he's in a rural area of Fayette County. So the cell phone tower dump could have been fruitful because probably wouldn't have been as many cell phones pinging off of those towers during that time. But it was a holiday weekend, but where the cell towers were. So I was already in the process of looking at that, which would have been a huge amount of data if you've ever seen anything like that. You've got everybody that uses a cell phone bouncing off a cell phone tower. So it would have been something we would have had. But ultimately, I didn't have to do that. But that was something I was looking at doing because we were running out of information on this.
Is there a process you have to follow to get that information?
Yes, you have to fill out a search warrant, judge assign it, and then ultimately send it to the cell phone company. And depending on how much data you want to narrow it down, you want a time frame. So we kind of had a time frame because of the witnesses out there knew the time of the fire. But even with a 45-minute, hour window, you're still looking at a tremendous amount of data that you're going to have to sift through.
Interesting. I just wanted people to know that you just can't arbitrarily call and get all of that.
Right.
We don't get to. We're not NSA, and we're certainly not Mark Zuckerberg. I've said before that he knows more about you and I than NSA ever will.
So what do we do at this point with what we have?
Well, ironically enough, we were on the 6th, the day after Labor Day. I had a witness come forward and who had seen the victim the day that he got killed in his car.
How did he know to come to you? But I guess he knew of the death, so he just reached out to the police?
Well, he didn't know for sure that it was Trevor, but he had saw where there was a car that was burned. And he just put two and two together that it could be him because he also lived in the Cardinal Valley area as well. So
he contacts you and says what?
He contacts me and comes to police headquarters and told me at about 6:59 on Sunday the 4th, he saw the victim in the backseat of his car in the Cardinal Valley area screaming and asking him to call the police because they were stealing his car. And
with him in it?
With him in it. They wouldn't give him his car back. And he described the driver as a female white with blonde hair and a passenger, male black with dreads.
So now you're a little bit closer and having more detail, but I mean, that can fit so many people in Lexington and everywhere.
Absolutely. So once we received that information, we again started looking for more video surveillance to see if looking at the streets that he saw them on at the time and looking at for more video surveillance in that area to see if we could capture that car and or those suspects with the victim that night.
And did you?
No.
So back to square one.
Back to square one.
So you get a call from someone who says that they've seen him in his own car with these two people driving.
Yes.
So what happens?
Well, he had explained that he was in the back seat, like I mentioned earlier, wanting this. They knew each other and wanting him to call the police because they were stealing his car. And the female white was driving, the male black was in the front passenger seat, and the victim, Mr. Dilger, was in the back. What was interesting about that, from the victim's account, was when he saw this was about 30 minutes prior to the fire call going out on Red Road. So we knew that he was probably with these two people when he was ultimately killed and the car was taken out to.
And headed in that direction. So you pull security camera footage.
Yes.
And it produces nothing.
We looked at video surveillance all in that neighborhood and unfortunately just never did capture anything from it.
You know what this sounds like, Wendy, and you'll think of it too when I say it is the murder of Alex Johnson. Where there was a struggle in a car and it was witnessed and how it was right in that close, immediate time frame of how that wound up.
And he also was in the backseat of the car. Wasn't
right.
his car, but he was in the backseat of the car.
That's a nice stroke of luck, though, to have somebody come forward with that. That's tight stuff. That's the stuff you pray for.
But then how bad are you beating your head against the wall when you have no video footage of it and you have descriptions, but there's not much you can do with that.
You beat your head against the wall a lot, and the old saying is it's better to be lucky than good. So sometimes luck does play in your favor, especially in homicides.
Oh, yeah, that's 9/10 of it. We'd like to believe everybody's a genius, but I've always said that, and I might have said it before, but I'll say it again, but it's not so much that we're smart as we wait for the bulb to flicker over their head and we jump on them in the dark. And that's always the way I've looked at it, is that if I'm paying enough attention to you, you'll make a mistake. I've just got to be in the right place to grab it. So.
Yes.
So if this is your only lead and it takes you nowhere, do you just wait until another lead comes, or how do you progress?
Well, we did get another lead. We had a tip that came in. We received some information that...
Hey, you know there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, which is our website, and it has show notes for imagery and audio and video files related to the cases you're going to hear. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and YouTube, which has closed caption available for those that are hearing impaired. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or wherever you download your podcast from. Subscribe to the Murder Police Podcast and set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.